one of the things that happens in the UK all the time is amongst the kind of chattering classes and the commentariat, they will often say, how on earth did Donald Trump get elected? They said it in 2016. They especially said it in 2017 when he was inaugurated. The screaming woman meme. That was expressed across these kind of informed circles. And I often say to them, look, the election of Donald Trump is the most logical thing that has happened in American politics in decades. It makes perfect sense to me that people would elect someone like him, even though I have many disagreements with him. And, people will say, but I often make the point that working people in America wanted to send a message to the establishment. They wanted to send a message to the establishment about how they've handled the economy, about their cultural contempt for ordinary Americans, for working Americans. I think it's really important for working class people to understand how much this new elite hates them. It really hates them with a visceral passion. And we see it in the United Kingdom and we see it in the United States. In the United States, you have the Hillary Clinton basket of deplorables view of these people, or Biden referring to them as semi-fascists, or even going back to Barack Obama, who was probably more sensible than those two, saying these people cling to their Bibles and their guns and they're scared of foreigners. In the UK, it expresses itself with the description of these people as gammon. They're referred to working class people who vote for Brexit.
What is gammon?
Gammon is a reference to their red faces, lower class, middle-aged men, red in the face. They're called gammon. Gammon is pygmy, right? And it brings to mind what Edmund Burke said about the democratic multitude in the 1700s, and he referred to them as the swinish multitude. That image of the pig-like masses has come back. It's so important, I think, for working class people to know that this new establishment hates them with a passion. And that's why the working class revolts against this establishment that have taken place over the past decade or so, the election of Trump, the vote for Brexit, the vote for various populist parties in Europe, is such an important turning point, because this is ordinary people staking their claim to a voice in public life and saying we matter, our economic needs matter, our cultural values matter, our community matters, our families matter. That's what these people are saying. And so when people say, Donald Trump is a blunt instrument, he's an unwieldy cudgel for these people to use against the establishment, absolutely right. But what other instrument did they have? What other weapon did they have?
Right.
That trade unions have been decimated. Communities have been decimated by the ceaseless march of neoliberal values and state intervention. The left has utterly abandoned working class people and has made itself an instrument of the bourgeoisie, the identitarian graduate set. That's what the left now means. So the working classes have been left utterly denuded of any other political mechanism through which to make their voices heard. So the fact that they said, okay, we'll give Trump a punt, makes perfect sense to me. It's absolutely logical. There is no problem with that at all. So I think one of the positive things of our time is that whoever is doing all this crazy stuff to us, whether it's the robots or society itself, I think it's society itself, the good thing is people are pushing back. They're saying enough is enough. We don't want any more of this crap shoved down our throats, and we are going to rebel, even if it's in a way that you disapprove of.
And this is something that's important for people to understand. Historically, that has always been the case. There's always been narratives, and there's always been people that push against those narratives, and there's always been a conflict. This idea that we're ever going to exist in a society, particularly one today, where I think it's greatly accentuated by the access to social media, because the ability to complain, and people that are addicted to complaining, they're doing it all day long and arguing all day long. There's never been a time where people were completely at peace.
Yeah.
Ideologically ever. These are ridiculous notions that people keep in their head. They reminisce in a very false way, and it's just not the case. As someone who grew up during the Vietnam War when that was happening, the country was very divided. The country was extremely divided. I was living on the West Coast, and there was a lot of confusion in this country because it was an unjust war that made no sense, and people were being forced to go over there and fight. Yeah. It was a crazy time of division. And when the Vietnam War ended, it kind of like cooled off for a little bit. And then in the 80s, we started getting terrified of getting bombed.
Yeah.
That was during the 80s. That was the big fear that came upon us. So it's like I've seen these things before. They always exist. It's just right now it's hyper fed by social media, hyper fed, where it's just it's a wildfire that I don't know if we're going to be able to put out.
But I think what's interesting about today is that it's like there are two culture wars going on. So there's the social media stuff, right? There's these kind of slightly pantomime conflicts taking place between the kind of identitarian left saying you have to acknowledge my gender and my right to have a dick and a vagina at the same time and all that crazy stuff. And then you have the kind of the right-wing elements on the very online right, who I don't particularly have a problem with. Some of them are interesting people, and they're kind of having this fight all day long on the internet every day. But in society more broadly, something more important is happening, which is that ordinary people in their millions are looking at all this stuff. They're reading all this stuff. They're looking at Saturday Night Live and seeing the blind contempt that these lovies and these cultural figures have for them. They're looking at things that Biden says. They're looking at the border and this idea that who cares if the border is porous? Who cares if it's open? It doesn't matter. They're looking at all this stuff and they're saying, this is irrational. This is dangerous. The establishment poses as the adults in the room, but actually they're insane. They have insane views on biology, on borders, on national security, on climate, on everything else, and on the economy. They're looking at all this and saying the voice of reason has to come back in. And they see themselves as the voice of reason. And I think they're right to see themselves as the voice of reason. And it's like we had this movement in Britain in the 1840s called the Chartists. And this was a movement for the right of men to vote, because working class men at that point couldn't vote. And it was a brilliant movement for the right of working class men to vote. And they had this weekly newspaper. And there's one article in that newspaper which is very well known where they said, you know, the priests and the academics and the rulers of society, they pose as experts. But actually the ordinary man in the street, the ordinary woman in the street, the person with a normal job is far more of an expert than they are, because he lives in society in a way that they don't. He sees the problems in society in a way that they, in their rarefied circles, don't. So ordinary people have a keener understanding, I think, of the problems afflicting their communities, the problems afflicting their societies, and the problems afflicting their young people.